Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time we're going to be continuing to build on our spaceship setup. So previously we've gotten things going like our visual effects, our auto sort of leveling, our auto landing system, being able to switch from first person to the actual spaceship controls. So what we're going to focus on this time is a few sort of quality of life improvements and general polish. This is something to recommend when you're working on a project. Don't do all of the polish at the end. When there are things that you can identify, easy wins of improving stuff that you can do early on, make sure you do that. It improves sort of stuff, and it means that you can have more time to identify further improvements. So always try and every so often make sure you do some cleanup, some polish and improvement there, fix up any issues. It's going to result in a much better project then. So let's dive on in. So a couple of things that want to be able to do with this. So if we fire it up at the moment and we take a look at our sort of setup, we have it that we can move around, and that to switch, we do our switching by not necessarily the sort of cleanest method of where we go and change our sort of requested target. So that's something where if we change this to spaceship, then it switches us over. So we want to change that around, so we actually we go up to the spaceship and we can, activate it there, things like of that. We also want to make sure we're turning off the UI stuff like of that. So first thing we're going to do is give the input dispatcher control over the HUD, just so that we can have, and I'm going to set this so we'll have a game object, player HUD, and another one for the spaceship HUD. That way we can make sure we set the correct ones visible. So player HUD.enabled. Actually, that would be set active, is based on if the current target is equal to player. And then we do the exact same thing with the spaceship HUD, like of that. So that will allow us to switch those off and on, which is going to be great. So input dispatcher, we can link that up to the spaceship HUD. Player HUD, that's actually something where what I will do is I'm going to create a new canvas. Player HUD. Do the same sort of thing, scale with screen size. And I will also, under this, just add in a little image for the reticle. So we can do that. That will give us that in the center of the screen. We can adjust the size of that. So it just gives us a little marker there. Throw a bit of transparency on it. Just give us a way of knowing where our center point is. And one important thing we want to do is turn off raycast target. If you don't, what will happen is it will go and that can block working in other bits of UI. So what this should now mean is we don't see that regular UI, but we do have our player HUD there. Input dispatcher, we switch over to the spaceship. Spaceship UI appears. If we switch back to player, so that's good. So we've got HUD switching happening there, which is great. That also ties in well because there's some extra things I want to add to the spaceship HUD as well as we go through with this. So, okay, so far so good. Well, now we want it to be a case that the player can actually actively walk up to the spaceship and say, hey, I would like to enter. So the spaceship, we want to be able to, with the player, if we go to our character motor, so we already have stuff for performing primary interactions here, and we already can send UI interactions. But what we want to do is have something for essentially enter and exit vehicle. So that might be something where for the player we use one input, and for the character for the character motor we use one input, for the spaceship we use another. So we're going to go to our input dispatcher, and we're going to open up our configs. So for the player, I want to add something in that's going to be essentially for enter vehicle. So it's going to be similar to like of our actions there. So we're going to have enter vehicle, and that would be a button. So for keyboard and mouse, I'm going to make that E. And then for gamepad, I'm going to make that, so in terms of other ones we've already used, we've used the east button. We have for run, we're using the shoulder, and for jump, we're using south. So for this, I'm going to use the west button. So that will give us enter vehicle. And then spaceship will have exit vehicle. So auto land is using button south. So in this case, I can keep this consistent. And what I will do is grab both of these, copy them, and paste them in here. So now we have enter vehicle and exit vehicle commands. We can set those up in our input dispatcher, similar to what we've done for all of the existing ones already. So we'd have protected void, and that will be on enter vehicle, input value. We'll also have a similar thing for on exit vehicle. So, okay, well, this is only going to be applicable for if we are the player, and this one's only going to be applicable for the spaceship. So these actually kind of need to do a level of communication happening, where the player needs to specifically check, hey, can I enter the spaceship? So that requires an adjacency there between them. So what I would do for something like that is that's where this input dispatcher kind of actually needs to be able to directly sort of talk to them. So this is something where I would look at having a serialized field, character motor, player, and a serialized field, spaceship controller. So, okay, exit vehicle. This, I want to go, okay, well, spaceship controller, attempt to exit vehicle, and we give it the player that's trying to exit. For this one, we would go, well, player controller, attempt to enter vehicle, spaceship controller. And what I could do is then make these actually have to return. And if they return true, then we do our setup here where we can change our requested target. So requested target we can update because that gets picked up there in update, or what we could do is just manually run a bunch of this. So what we could do is come down here, and we're going to set requested target is spaceship. And then in this case, well, what we will do is set it to player. So now these need to be able to handle this logic. So the player controller needs to know for entering. We could also potentially do all of this on the spaceship side. Would be the other way of approaching it, is that the spaceship handles fully the entry and exit. It's kind of, you could go either way with it, honestly. I might actually change it so that it is the spaceship does all of the heavy lifting. Could be done either way, and I'm not necessarily sure of what's going to, it would depend upon how you expanded things, which is going to work out cleanest. But I think this will work okay. So the spaceship, we're going to then set up our functions. We're going to put these just largely down the end here. So we'll have public void, and we'll have on enter vehicle. Well, actually, it's on attempt to enter vehicle. So attempt to enter vehicle, and we provide the character motor layer. And we'll also have public void attempt to exit vehicle. And again, character motor layer. And these are actually both Booleans. So exiting the vehicle, we want to check the height above ground. So if the height above ground is greater than our auto land min height, we could also set up our min height to exit. So it's greater than or equal to that. Right, that would be max permitted exit height. So if it is greater than that, we'll return false. So the idea is that we can lock out but can't exit if the vehicle is above a certain height. So header, entry and exit. We're going to set that to 1. And I have a similar thing for max permitted entry height. We may want these to be different, so that's why I'm keeping them as separate ones there. That will be a similar sort of thing where we check the height above ground. So too high to safely enter. In this case, too high to safely exit. So, okay, good. Well, there's other criteria we want to check as well. So if we're trying to enter the vehicle, we probably need to be reasonably close to it. So, close enough to the vehicle, or too far from the vehicle actually, to enter. So if vector 3, and this is actually where I think we do a vector 3 distance of player position and our current location of this vehicle, so our transform position, that is greater than max permitted entry distance, we return false. So again, we'll set this up. We'll allow, the spaceship's reasonably large, so we'll probably need to allow a decent distance. So that will have, say, 15. Actually, 10 might be enough. Then we want to make sure we're looking at it. Are we looking at the spaceship? So enter vehicle only runs when the player camera is active. So we can get the camera main, and we can then, from that, we can do a raycast. So we can do a screen point to ray, and we do that for, we want the center point of the screen. So what we would give that is a new vector 3 screen width and height like that. So ray, camera ray. Then we want to do a raycast to see if what it hits is the spaceship. So, okay, we do a F physics raycast. So this is going to be one of the ones where we do provide a camera ray. Now we're going to need a range, which that actually would be probably our max permitted entry distance. We want to check because we want a version where we can get a hit info, stuff like of that out. So that will allow us to get a hit info. So out hit info, max permitted entry distance. So we have raycast hit info. And then what we want to check is, did we hit a spaceship? So hit info, get, so we go to the game object. So we have our collider. We can do a get component in parent, because the actual parent spaceship object doesn't have a collider on it, the children do. So we take a look at the spaceship. So it has no collider, but its children do. So that's where we would grab that. So if that is equal to us, then we would be returning true. Otherwise, it would be returning false. So are we looking at the spaceship? So, okay, let's test that out. Let's see if it's able to fire off. Because what I should be able to do is walk up to the spaceship, and once I'm over at the spaceship, hit E. And so we did currently get an exception, and that is going to be because we need to link up our spaceship and player here. But we know it picked up the key, which is good. So we'll just test this out again. We move closer, press E, and it switches, and we are now in control of the spaceship. So that's good. We've got our entry of it. Now exit of it is going to be super basic, and we just return to wherever we were. But we don't necessarily want to do that. We might want to exit at a specific point. So attempt to exit vehicle also then needs to actually teleport the player to a suitable location. So what I'm going to do is and there's two ways we could do this. One way could be at that point of entry, we cache the location delta. It's the difference between the player and the spaceship, and then we enter. Or what we could do is we have the spaceship have some predefined markers. So I'm going to give the spaceship serialized field a list of transforms of exit markers. Reason providing multiple is I will just pick a random one, but we might want to then check if they're clear, stuff like of that. So I'm going to, now this I want to make sure that I have updated any bits where I need to. Again, not updating the Pro Builder stuff, but there's no other changes there, so that's good. So I'm going to open the prefab, and if I go to the scene view, then what I'm going to do is create an empty thing for the exit markers, which will put this up the top here. Then I'm going to create some empty ones, marker north, which I'll offset in Z by, I would say, I think probably offsetting it by 2, maybe a bit further actually. I might go for 2.5. It's probably about right. So marker north. we'll have marker south, which will be minus 2.5. And I'm going to duplicate those, and we'll have marker east, which will be 2.5 next, Z, like that. And then marker west, which will be minus 2.5. So that's good. Now those exit markers are all a bit higher up, so that's okay. We'll lower them down. And what I would normally do as an easy way to sort of tell the rough height is I'll often go and just add something like a sphere onto them, because that just makes it a little bit easier for positioning things. So that's pretty good, maybe 1.5. So we can see, so 1.6 is actually probably about right, but I might make it that it's just a little bit above the default area for the ground. We could also, with these, make them actually a decent chunk up in the air and we do a raycast down. It's actually the other option, which I might actually do that. I think that's probably a good approach. So there we go, we've got our markers. We can link those up now. So what it will do is it will pick a marker and do a raycast just to the ground to pick one that is in range. So there we go. So we've got our markers. So float, exit, marker, raycast range, which you might say 2 meters. So then in this case, what it's going to do, attempt to find a valid marker. So for each marker in exit markers. So for that marker, I want it to do a raycast down. So it's going to have a raycast hit info. We'll do a physics raycast. We are raycasting from marker's position. Now, if we have a look through, we want one where we can provide a direction and also get an output. So that's our one where we've got origin, direction, distance. That's good. And there we go. So origin, direction, hit info, and distance. So our direction is going to be vector 3 dot down. Our hit info, and we have our distance. So there we go. In this case, I return false. So that lowercase, there we go. So in this case we return true, but we also teleport the player. So we can set their transform position to, not that, but to actually the hit info dot point. So the location that we actually hit. So that looks pretty good. That should mean we exit at a suitable location and it should teleport the player. So I'm going to keep the player selected so we can just watch their location. So we're going to wander over to the ship. I'm going to enter it. So I've entered into the ship. I'm going to move. And now if I tried to exit at this point, it won't let me, which is good. We shouldn't be able to exit at this point, but then if I land, and then go to exit, it's found a suitable exit point, and so here I am, back outside the ship. So it's great. We've got the ability now to enter and exit. It's going to exit us at a suitable location, and that's working really nicely. So now we can get a couple of other improvements in there. So I said I wanted to make some changes to the HUD, and that is the case. I want to add in for the spaceship, I want to add in a little bit of a landing camera, because I think that will really help for doing precision landing. Okay, so to set up the landing camera, and before I do that, one of the things I'm going to do is turn on the stats, just so we can see sort of the performance that we typically are seeing if we wander around and do stuff in this. So we're sort of seeing 100 to 135, maybe 140, occasional massive drops. But generally we're sitting pretty decent in terms of the level of sort of frame rate there. One of the things we'll notice, and part of the reason I turned that on and we had a bit of a look, is because I want to set up this landing camera now, and we'll see sort of the impact there. So if we go to our spaceship, which one of the things I'm going to do towards the end is also do a bit of a cleanup in terms of location of this stuff. So with our spaceship, we're going to open up our prefab, and I'm going to add in another camera. So going to add in a camera here. We want to remove the audio listener, and I'm going to tilt that camera down so that it's looking directly down. So that would be 90. And I'm going to lower the height of it so that it's outside of the actual sort of view there. And might make it that it's like -1. It's probably about right. Now that is currently centered. And that is going to mean it gets a little obscured by the smoke and everything, which I'm actually very okay with. And I might move it down. No, -1 I think is fine. We'll test it out and we'll see. So this is going to output to a render texture. So I'm going to set up textures. I might just make this landing camera because it's going to have a lot of elements in it that are very simple. So we're going to have a render texture, landing camera. Going to link that up to this. And so immediately we do see a couple of changes there in the scale. That's because of the resolution for this. Landing camera doesn't need to be that large. I'm going to go for 512 by 512, but that's something you could mess around with. So that'll be good. We've got a camera there for it. So that's our landing camera. Landing camera. You could also change the projection of it, so there's like an orthographic one or that. It's really going to depend upon what you're after there with it. So, okay, we've got our landing camera. We'll bring that up to here. That's linked to that render texture. Now, then in the HUD, I am going to add in, for the instruments, a UI, and in this case, a raw image. Landing camera. I'm going to link that to that render texture. Now I'm going to take this image and turn off it being a raycast target. Now at the moment I want to move this outside of the instruments because it's at the moment is going to be getting affected by the positioning there, which I don't want. So this case, I want the landing camera to be top left, which means I need to adjust my anchor positions. So we adjust that like that. So if I take that landing instrument, and I can also just go and view the HUD here. So at the moment, that's really stretched. So that's okay. We adjust the width here to be 100. So then that is what we're seeing through the camera. I'm going to increase the size of this a little bit. So that will be our landing camera. So I'm going to create a little bit of a panel here for it. Landing camera, panel. This will do the same thing, anchoring up to the top like that. 200 by 200. Set it so it's a dark black background. It's going to look a little better. Bring the image under it and give it a little bit of a buffer. So landing camera panel, we might want to make that a bit of a darker border around it. We can also, if we get rid of that, that'll be a little bit clearer. So this, just as it is, I want to test out now and see how that looks. And the performance in particular is going to matter. So we want to, very easy to have performance go really not great with something like this. So that's working pretty nicely. We can see below the ground, but we do get the smoke in the road, which that's something where that's kind of a sort of stylistic choice in terms of whether we want to have that or not. If we don't want to have that, it's actually really easy for us to filter that out. So what we can do is with the spaceship, it's already in this spaceship layer and everything under it. So if we open that prefab, and if we take our landing camera, and in the landing camera, culling mask, if we change that, so it won't show the spaceship. And then we can make sure we save that, and let's test that out. So we'll run over, enter the spaceship. And so now that's working, but we lose the shadow of the spaceship, which is really handy. So this is where we want to kind of adjust it in a little bit, where we probably don't want to just eliminate every aspect of the spaceship. We probably only want to eliminate key parts. So what I would do, so I'm actually going to open that prefab, and the main thing is these visual effects. I really want to make those in a separate layer. So I'm going to create another layer that is going to be Spaceship VFX. I'm going to put all of these emitters into that layer. And then our landing camera, well, our landing camera will not cull Spaceship, but it will cull Spaceship VFX. This should mean we get the shadow, but we then don't have those flames and everything appearing in it. So head over, enter, so we've still got the shadow, but we don't have everything else now. So that's good. That makes it easier for us managing to orient stuff. And we even get to look at the sun with my terrible flying. So that's good. We don't necessarily want that on all the time. And performance is a potential factor for it. So we do see generally the performance is a little bit lower. So what we can do is we can actually tick that camera at a lower rate. So I'm going to open the prefab. The camera, I'm going to turn it off. And then in the spaceship, I am going to set up here, header, landing camera. So I'll have a serialized field camera for the landing camera. And then what I will do is I want to actually have it, the landing camera only applies within a certain distance. So max height to use landing camera. So unless we're under 100, we don't use it. Now that means I want to be able to turn it off. So we'll add in a game object, landing camera display. And then what I'm going to do is this is down in update. So F, height above ground, is less than max height to use the landing camera, then we can enable it. So the landing camera display, set active to true. Otherwise, we'll turn it off. So if we can use the landing camera, so can we use the landing camera? Now, if we can, we actually want to manually tick it. So this is a way that you can avoid the sort of heavy frame rate impact. So what I will do is also set up float landing camera FPS. So essentially the refresh rate we're going for with it. So protected float time until next landing camera refresh. So this is something I've found makes a big difference, because otherwise that camera is just going to tick essentially as fast as it feasibly can, because that's its expectation of what we want it to do. But that might not be what we want it to do. So in this case, well, if the time until the next refresh is less than or equal to 0, then we'll do landing camera, tell it to render. Time until next landing camera refresh is landing camera frames per second, and we do 1 divided by that. So then we need to update the time here. So we minus time.delta time. That looks good. And because we want to ensure if we now suddenly can do a refresh, or if we're suddenly now at the correct height, we want to just force a refresh. So we just set it to 0 at that point. That's going to ensure as soon as it comes back in range, we'll make sure we render the camera. So it looks pretty good. So ready to render the next frame. That just makes it really easy for us to control the rate of it. So it means if you don't want something to update super quickly, you can avoid it updating super quickly. So we just link up the camera. I'm going to refresh it at 30. And I will make sure I've got that actually as the default here of 30, because I think that should be reasonable, but you could adjust that, again, depending upon the quality you're wanting to convey with the camera. You could very easily adjust that. Oops, always forget within prefab, when you go to play, you need to save and exit from it. So, landing camera display we need to link up as well. So that's all good. We can link that up. That comes from here. So what we should find is we can enter this. Performance is back more like what it was before. We have our render camera, but once I get high enough, that will actually switch off. So it's switched off, but I let my altitude drop. Then as soon as I go below 100, it's now back on with the landing camera, which means then I can much more easily position above things. So something like of this, if I want to position much more reliably, pretty much in the center, I can do that just by focusing on the landing camera. So it's going to allow much more precise positioning, which is great. That's a good thing to enable for the players. So, and then I can at this point exit. Now, if I want to just test if my raycasting is working well, this is where what I can do is I'm just going to position very gently right onto the edge so that most of the exit locations should be invalid. So I go to exit and it places me conveniently in a safe location, which is great. So we've got the ability now to enter and exit the spaceship. That's switching HUDs as well. That's enforcing constraints and some basic checks there to ensure that we're not, exiting the spaceship when it is way, way, way up in the air. So we've got some little safety nets there. It's also checking that the locations are valid to place the player there, and we'll actually place them precisely. So if it was a bit of a slope, things like that, it's going to be able to handle that for us. And we've got our landing camera that's going to just automatically switch on, which is great. So we've got a lot of extra controls in there and a lot of quality of life improvements. And with the landing camera, we very carefully set that up so that it was going to be able to work with avoiding sort of seeing the visual effects we had there, and also not burning a huge amount of performance. So the final little bits we'll then do is we will update the spaceship HUD, and we're going to create a dedicated folder for the spaceship and relocate. So things like our audio need to go into there. Landing camera needs to go into there as well. Scripts will also go there. So it just keeps it all neater. The prefabs will also go into there. So it just makes it a bit more of a modular component. And materials, well, the rocket exterior and interior, those need to go over to here as well. So we'll also create a folder for those materials. So just makes it a little bit neater. We'll bring the VFX into here too. So everything else is just the default stuff, which is good. So we've got our project there. We can easily be adding extra things to it. So if there's other bits you want to add in, start experimenting with it. See how precise a landing you can do. You might be extra sort of overlays you wanted to do for the landing camera, especially if it's auto landing. There could be cool things you add in there. So have a think about things like that you might want to add in. Thanks folks, I hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. It really helps out, it's really appreciated. If you've got any questions, chuck those in a comment below. If there's other bits you'd like to see added to this, chuck in a comment as well, suggestion there. If you are looking for the code for the project, I've put a link to that in the description below, and that code's available up on GitHub. You can freely use that in any of your own projects, commercial and non-commercial ones. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there is a link to that in the description below as well. But until next time,